When I think about that summer, I feel both joy and pain. Joy for the love I found, and pain for how it all ended. I was just 17 when I met Noah Calhoun, young, carefree, and ready to take on the world. Or so I thought. My family had rented a beautiful house in Seabrook for the summer. It was one of those places you'd see in magazines. Wide verandas, sparkling rivers, and warm sunsets. It was supposed to be a quiet summer, filled with garden parties and polite conversations. But then I met him and nothing was the same again. The first time I saw him was at the carnival. He wasn't like the boys I knew. His shirt was wrinkled, his hands rough from work, and yet there was something about the way he looked at me. When he climbed onto the Ferris wheel, risking his life just to get my attention, I thought he was crazy. I laughed, partly out of shock and partly because no one had ever done anything like that for me. "No!" I shouted. "I'm not going out with you." But he just hung there, smiling like a fool, refusing to take no for an answer. And somehow, against my better judgment, I said yes. At first, I thought it would just be a summer fling, a few dates, some fun, and then we'd part ways. But Noah had a way of pulling me into his world. He wasn't polished or wealthy, but he was honest, real, and alive in a way I had never been. Our first date was simple, just a walk through town. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told me about his love for the river, how it made him feel free. I told him about my dreams of painting, how I wanted to capture the world in colors and brush strokes. That night, as we danced in the middle of an empty street, I felt something I'd never felt before. Freedom, happiness, love. The days that followed were a blur of laughter and stolen moments. We explored every inch of Seabrook, rode on the river, climbed trees and lay under the stars, dreaming of a life where nothing could pull us apart. But reality has a way of creeping in, no matter how hard you try to ignore it. My parents didn't approve of Noah. "He's not your kind, Allie," my mother said one evening. Her voice was cold, her words sharper than I expected. "He has no future, no money. He's not what you need." But how could she know what I needed? That night, I met Noah at our spot by the river. He could see the worry in my eyes before I even said a word. "Oh, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice soft, his hand brushing mine. "My parents," I whispered. "They don't think we should be together." He laughed, though there was no humor in it. I figured they wouldn't. I looked at him, my heart aching. "But I don't care what they think. I love you, Noah." It was the first time I had said it out loud, and when he kissed me, I knew he felt the same. But love isn't always enough. The summer was ending, and I was supposed to leave for college. My parents had decided everything for me, and I felt trapped between the life they wanted for me and the one I wanted with Noah. On our last night together, we went to the old house by the river. It was falling apart, but we didn't care as we stood in the empty rooms imagining a future together. He made me promise that no matter what happened, I wouldn't forget him. "I'll write to you every day," he said, his voice steady even as his eyes glistened with unshed tears. I nodded, unable to speak. The thought of leaving him felt like a knife to my heart. The next morning, I was gone. My parents had packed the car while I was still asleep, refusing to let me say goodbye. I cried the whole way back to the city, clutching the memories of that summer like they were the only things keeping me alive. Weeks turned into months. I waited for his letters, checking the mailbox every morning, but they never came. At first, I told myself he was busy or unsure of what to say, but as the months passed, doubt began to creep in. Had he moved on? Had I meant so little to him? My mother tried to console me, though her words only made it worse. "It's for the best, Allie," she said. "You'll see that in time." But I didn't see it. I couldn't. Eventually, I forced myself to move on. I met Lon, a kind, charming man who treated me with respect and love. My parents adored him, and he offered me the stability they had always wanted for me. But he wasn't Noah. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memories of that summer. The sound of Noah's laughter, the feel of his hand in mine, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. Years later, by chance, or perhaps fate, I saw a picture in the newspaper. It was a photo of a house, white, with blue shutters, sitting by the river. My breath caught in my throat. It was our house, the one we had dreamed of. Without thinking, I packed my bags and drove back to Seabrook. I didn't know what I would say or how he would react, but I had to see him. I had to know if he had kept his promise. When I arrived, I saw him standing on the porch, paintbrush in hand. He looked older, his face tanned from the sun, his shoulders broader than I remembered. But when he saw me, his eyes lit up with the same warmth I had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Allie," he said softly, as if he couldn't believe I was real. I smiled through the tears already streaming down my face. Hi, Noah." Seeing him again after all those years felt like stepping back into a dream, one that I had long tried to forget. He stood there staring at me, as if I were a ghost from his past. "Allie," he said again, his voice cracking slightly. "You came back." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "I had to see you," I whispered. "The house, it's exactly how we imagined it." He smiled, a bittersweet smile that held both joy and pain. "I built it for you," he said simply. We spent the afternoon walking through the house. It was everything we had dreamed of, and more. The shutters, the white walls, even the art studio. He had remembered it all. I ran my fingers over the wooden banister, memories flooding back with every step. "It's beautiful, Noah," I said, tears brimming in my eyes. "You did it." As I looked at him, the weight of my reality crashed down on me. I had a life back in the city, a fiancé, a future that didn't include him. "I'm engaged," I blurted out, the words feeling like knives on my tongue. His smile faded and he looked away. "I know," he said quietly. I saw the ring. The silence between us was heavy. I could feel his pain, the unspoken words hanging in the air. "No," I said, stepping closer to him. "I didn't come here to hurt you." He turned back to me, his eyes filled with sadness. "Then why did you come, Allie?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, I didn't know. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. We spent hours talking, reminiscing, and laughing like we used to. But there was always that invisible line between us, the reminder that I wasn't his anymore. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he asked me the question I'd been dreading. "Do you love him?" I froze. The answer wasn't simple. Lon was kind, stable, and everything my parents had ever wanted for me. But Noah was my heart. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice trembling. The days passed too quickly. Every moment with Noah felt like borrowed time, and I didn't want it to end. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stay in Seabrook forever. On my last night there, we danced under the stars, just like we had that summer. Zach was our husband. I had been with him less than a month ago. And then, I knew I couldn't stay in Seabrook forever. On my last night there, we danced like we had forever. On my last night, his arms around me felt like home, and I wished I could freeze that moment and never let it go. The next morning, I packed my bags, my heart heavy with the decision I knew I had to make. "Noah," I said, standing at the door, "I need to figure out what I want. I need to go back." He didn't try to stop me, he just nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "I'll wait for you, Allie," he said, "no matter how long it takes." I drove back to the city, but my heart stayed in Seabrook. Lon welcomed me with open arms, but every time he smiled at me, I felt like I was betraying him. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself constantly thinking about Noah. The way he looked at me, the sound of his laughter, the house he had built with love. One evening, as Lon talked about our wedding plans, I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't marry him, knowing my heart belonged to someone else. The next morning, I packed my things and drove back to Seabrook. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing with thoughts of what I would say to Noah. When I arrived, he was sitting on the porch reading a book. He looked up as I stepped out of the car, his eyes widening in surprise. "You came back," he said, standing up. Tears streamed down my face as I ran to him, throwing my arms around him. "I couldn't stay away," I sobbed. "I tried, Noah, I really did, but I love you. I always loved you." He held me tightly, his own tears falling freely. "I love you too, Allie," he whispered. "I always have." From that day on, we were inseparable. We built a life together in the house by the river, filling it with laughter, love, and memories. It wasn't always easy. We had our share of fights and challenges, but through it all, our love endured. Because when you find someone who sees you for who you are, who loves you completely, you hold on to them. Even now, as I look back on those days, I can still feel the warmth of his hand in mine. I can still hear the sound of his voice, telling me I was his greatest love, and he was mine. If you liked my story, please like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.